Here we go. So we're going to talk about microgreens. Hopefully I inspire you to love them as much as I do. To ground us, first I'll start off in talking about what is a microgreen so that we know really when we're talking about microgreen, what exactly is that? What stage in a plant's life cycle is that? I'll talk about some ways that I love to grow, why I like to grow microgreens. It might be something that you can relate to. We'll talk about going back to the poll, what are different types of plants, vegetables and herbs that you could grow into microgreens. That might be something that you would like to grow. We'll talk about the several different ways that you could grow microgreens so that you could choose which would be the best way for yourself. I'll talk about tips about how to grow and how to successfully grow so that you'll get those lovely microgreens at the end of your growing journey. I'm also going to share with you some common issues that you might come across as you grow microgreens so that if you see that, you'll know what it means and how to tackle it and solve it. And then we'll also talk about when and how to harvest, how to store, and of course, how to enjoy. So let's talk first a little bit briefly about the 4 foundations of successful gardening. If you've joined one of our webinars in the past, you've certainly seen this slide, and there's good reason. These 4 items, soil, water, aeration, and sun, are really what we call or refer to as master gardeners as good cultural care. Really, when it comes down to it, for every plant, whether it be an edible, an ornamental, something you're starting for seed, something you're planting from the nursery directly, you're really going to want to make sure that you've got really good soil as a foundation. Now, microgreens don't grow in soil, but they definitely need a medium to grow in. So we will talk about that as far as and how it relates to microgreens. Water is so important to every plant. Some require a little, some require a lot, and some require a moderate amount. Microgreens, water, besides buying seeds and good seeds, water is going to be the second most important thing. Your seeds will not be able to germinate without water. So we will talk a lot about water. Aeration is important above and below ground. And with seeds, it's important too to make sure they have adequate spacing and room to grow and breathe. And sun, light. Light is very critical for all plants' health and success. And we will talk about what the right amount of light and sun is required to successfully grow microgreens. So we'll be talking and hitting on all 4 of these good cultural care foundational items when we talk about microgreens tonight. So I promised I'd start off and tell you what a microgreen is. Besides the things in the little plastic containers that you see in the grocery store, what exactly are they? What's the official thing that they're called? What microgreens are the young seedlings of veggies and herbs. So they're really going to be, the first couple weeks of a plant's life. So every full-grown plant starts off as a microgreen. Really, what we're going to be doing is harvesting the cotyledons of a microgreen. So if you've ever started a plant from seed, what happens is the first thing to pop up, the stem, and then these 2 little leaves. Those aren't the true leaves, which will look different. They are the cotyledons. That is what is going to get photosynthesis started with the plant, and it looks very different than the true leaves. So we will be harvesting the microgreens before the true leaves develop. So really, what in the plant's first couple weeks of its life. So a lot of what's going to be going on with the plant when you grow microgreens is below the ground. A lot of roots are going to be going because it's really looking for water. Water is what's going to help that, send up that stem and then the cotyledon, which will then start photosynthesis. So this is why we'll talk about the growing medium, and adequate water is so important. So this is what the microgreen is, just that little itty bitty first stage of a plant's life. You might also hear sprouts. Sometimes sprouts are called microgreens and microgreens are called sprouts. There is a difference, and I just want to point them out. You could tell by looking at this picture, they certainly look different, and they are different in 2 different ways. One is the stage of a plant's life cycle that they are harvested and enjoyed and eaten, and the second is how they're grown. So a seed first becomes a sprout, and then it becomes a microgreen. So really the first stage of the seed's life, or the plant's life, will be the sprouts. You could see here When you're growing sprouts or eating sprouts, you could see the seed, you could see the shoot and some roots. So it's going to be a little bit more crunchy. There aren't any stems and there aren't any leaves. This is really going to be in the first week of a plant's life. First 5 to 7 days it takes to grow sprouts. Sprouts are grown in a jar without any type of growing medium and with water that's shaken. Whereas with microgreens, you're going to be using a growing medium. This looks like coconut coir that these beautiful microgreens are growing on. And it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to be about 2 weeks or a little bit longer to grow those microgreens. And you're going to be eating the stems and the cotyledons. So now you know, if somebody serves you microgreens and they call it sprouts, you'll be in the know that they are microgreens truly. So a seed becomes a sprout and then a microgreen. And so today we'll be focusing on microgreens, not sprouts. So what are some of the reasons that you might want to grow them? They are very trendy, that's for sure. A lot of restaurants you go and you might see them and it might pique your interest. But one of the things I love about them is that you can grow them indoors and you could grow them year round. So you don't need a large garden. In fact, you don't need any outdoor space. They are grown indoors. So if you have an indoor space and a counter that can fit them, you can grow microgreens. So it's very accessible if you're not able to go outside, maybe you don't like to go outside, it's something that you could grow really easily on the countertop in your bathroom, in your kitchen, wherever. So it's very accessible. It's also very clean. You don't need any soil. So it's not dirty. You're not going to get your hands or your fingers dirty. So if that's something about gardening that's not something you particularly like, then maybe microgreens is for you. You don't need any soil. They also grow very quickly, within a couple weeks at the most. Some a little longer for those that grow longer. On average, a couple weeks from the time you start them to the time you start eating them, you'll have microgreens. Whereas for a whole plant to grow, it might take, months to grow until from the time you plant it till the time you get the vegetables or fruit. So it grows pretty quick. It also requires minimal care. Really just making sure that moisture is even, that we'll talk about, is really the care that's required. It takes up very little space. You as a grower get to decide, how much space do you want to take up with microgreens? Do you want a small little tray? Do you want something big? Do you want lots of trays all over the place? You get to choose. So it takes up as little or as much space as you want. You could also grow year round. I know for myself, I grow a lot of stuff from seed and all through early fall, in the spring and summer. And the winter time is when I grow a lot of microgreens because it's when I kind of pause, come indoors, and slow down a little bit on my outside gardening. So I like that it fills up that time in my life for me, time of the year. They're also incredibly nutritionally dense. So it's said that they have 5 to 7 times the amount of nutritional value of a full-grown plant in that tiny little stem. There's also a lot of phytonutrients in microgreens. So those are really important things for good health and disease prevention. So you have a lot of really great health benefits to microgreens as well. So if you have a picky eater who's not particularly fond of vegetables, but needs that nutritional value, sprinkle little microgreens and you'll get 5 times the value in a little teeny bite. So, that might work for you too, if you're not a huge fan of the big full-grown vegetable. And the cost savings. You will buy at the store a little tray of microgreens for around $4, especially when you start buying seeds in bulk. You're just going to be paying pocket change to grow a container of microgreens. So it's quite a bit of cost savings. And the flavor is very flavorful, really strong. So you get a really nice pop of flavor for that little sprinkle of microgreens. So those are some of the many reasons I love growing microgreens. So I saw a lot of people were very curious about what type of plants you can grow from microgreens. Really, most vegetables and herbs you can grow from microgreens. I have some of those wonderful vegetables and herbs listed here. You can see we have beets, arugula, cabbage, radishes, peas, spinach, parsley, and basil. So all of these things can be grown as microgreens. And if you think about the taste of radish, or arugula, that more peppery taste, that's going to be like that pop of taste that you'll have on your plate, or a little bit of basil microgreens maybe on your spaghetti. So you can add that little extra bit of flavor and decoration on top of your plate. When you look at microgreens, there are slow and quick growing microgreens. And I do want to pause really quick at the end. As Terry mentioned, you can have access to a handout. There'll be a QR code to take a brief survey, and then you'll be given, you'll go directly to a PDF of our handout. There's a lot of this information, including the quick and slow growing microgreens. And there's also a really great book that I found that has an alphabetical listing of plants you could grow as microgreens, and it will tell you, how many days to harvest. Is it slow growing, fast growing? So it's a really great resource if you want to get really into this and find out what other things you could grow. So microgreens typically fall into two categories, slow or quick. So really depends on what flavor you want and maybe how long you want to take to grow your microgreens. Here listed on the left are some quick. So those are typically from the time you start your tray of microgreens to the time you're harvesting. It will take 10 to 15 days. So about a week and a half to 2 weeks. Some quick growing microgreens are things like arugula, broccoli, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, mustard, amaranth, radish, and spinach. Things that take slower to grow are things like basil, beet, buckwheat, cilantro, dill, and sunflower. Those are about 18 to 26 days. So really 2.5 to 3.5 weeks. Herbs in general are going to be a lot slower growing and take longer. So something to consider, especially if you're interested in growing microgreens as herbs. But I'm going to zoom in. This picture right here, in a minute, I'll zoom in. I'm growing one in a hydroponic tray, which we'll talk about, beets. And the other one, I believe, is kohlrabi that I'm growing on the right. And I'm going to zoom in just so you could see. So beets are slow growing. Kohlrabi is a faster growing. I started these trays on the same time. So you could see, look at the leaves, the cotyledons haven't even opened up. They're quite a bit shorter. Where if you look over at the other tray, the cotyledons are fully open and growing, and they're about an inch taller. So this is just a really good illustration about just to see a picture of two slow and quick growing that were started at the same time, and how they look. So yeah, there's definitely some that are slower than others. And it's good to know. So if you're expecting to, have those microgreens ready for a dinner party, you could kind of count backwards to know when you need to start your microgreens. So that's why that's important to know. So I'm going to tell you, I mentioned at the beginning that microgreens are pretty easy to grow. Honestly, like collecting all of the supplies, including seeds, is going to be the most time-consuming part. I promise you that. So let's talk a little bit about what supplies are needed. You need seeds. Seeds are going to be probably the thing that takes you the longest amount of time. And we'll talk about later about selecting good seeds and storage, but you'll need seeds. You'll need a spray bottle with water, and we'll talk about water a little bit later and the importance and the quality of water needed. You need bright light. So you're going to need 10 plus hours of light. And if you say, well, I have got the counter space, but I don't have a window near the counter space, you can also use a grow light. A lot of grow lights now are pretty inexpensive. You could get them, for $20 or under. And a lot of them have timers. So you can get that 10 hours of light through your microgreens using a grow light if you don't have a natural light source to grow your microgreens in. You'll need scissors. That's what you're going to use to harvest your greens. Any old scissors can do. It doesn't matter. I would just say whatever scissors you use, just make sure they're nice and sterilized, because again, you want to make sure it's food safe. And you're going to need a dome or a cover. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk more, you have two different methods that you can grow microgreens in, and we're going to talk about both. If you choose to grow in a tray or a container, you're going to need the tray itself to grow in. And I'm going to give you a number of different options of trays that you can choose to grow from. And you're going to need a sterile growing medium. So I mentioned we don't use soil. We need something sterile that doesn't have fertilizers or anything in it that will help the plant grow. It just needs sterile so that the seed can just, absorb the water and grow from there. And we'll talk about a couple different options for a sterile growing medium. If you're choosing to grow hydroponic, and by hydroponic, what I mean is that you're using a vessel that holds water and a mesh screen. So here's an example right here. This is a vessel that holds water, and this mesh screen, the holes are super, super, super small. So it'll allow water to evenly come up to the seeds. So the seeds are in regular contact with the water, but the seeds won't fall through. So if you're doing hydroponic, you'll need to have a container and that has a screen. And I also suggest using hydrogen peroxide, which I have pictured right here. I just squirt, do kind of a couple little squirts into my hydroponic container about this size. So a little bit more if you're using a bigger container. That's just going to help keep the water fresh. Now, there are certainly times that I've forgotten that and they've grown certainly fine, but I like to do it as just a kind of insurance policy. So you could see, here's a fun picture. A couple weeks ago, I gave this talk in San Ramon, and we set up a station. So what I like to do is I gather up all my supplies, and I kind of just put them in the order that I'm going to do. I've got my container, my growing medium, water, and seeds. And I'm going to walk you through step by step how to do it. So these are all the supplies that you will need if you're thinking about growing microgreens at home. So seeds are going to be the most important. You want to know what type of plant you want to grow, and you want to get high quality seeds. So let's talk a little bit about that. You want to get garden seeds. So you're not going to be buying things that are, for commercial growing. So you could go to your local garden center. You do want to make sure to get organic seeds. Those are going to be untreated seeds, and they're going to be a little bit higher quality. So for sure, if you're looking for a basil, you could go to your garden center. There's also a lot of online suppliers of seeds too. So just make sure that they're of a good quality. And usually on the back of them, there's like an expiration date or a package or harvest date. You want to make sure that packaging date or that harvest date wasn't many, many years ago. Most seeds are going to last for about 5 years. So make sure your seeds have been harvested recently, because with each passing year, even those seeds that are stored properly, the germination rates will go down. So make sure if you're paying for the seeds that they're, look for that packaging or harvest date to make sure that you're getting new seeds and that they're organic. Use a reputable supplier, so if you're buying at a garden center or known seed companies, seed catalogs, those are considered reputable suppliers. So, you go down to your local nursery, they're going to be selling you seeds of good quality. I also say start small. Once you start finding what microgreens you like to grow, you can buy in bulk, and that will reduce the cost, certainly. But when I first started growing microgreens, I just bought the little seed packets. You need about 1 teaspoon for kind of most of the small containers that you'll be growing microgreens in. So you don't need a lot. So it's fun to kind of try a lot of different ones to see which you like growing before you buy bulk. So I always say start small, buy a little packet that looks like this. And then once you know, okay, I really like my favorites, I really like growing broccoli. And there's a greens mix that has like, broccoli and some field greens in it. I just buy those in bulk. So it's a little bit cheaper. So those are some things to think about when selecting seeds. I mentioned seed viability. So most seeds, if they're stored properly, are gonna, last and have good germination rates for about 5 years. They do decrease with age. So what does that mean? That means you might have to, sprinkle more seeds on to get the same amount of microgreens. Seed viability will go down not only with age, but if they're not stored properly. So how to store them? You could store them in a cool, dark place. Refrigerator and freezer are perfect to use. I use my seeds that I'm growing for microgreens. I just keep in an airtight container in my refrigerator, in my kitchen. If I have bulk, sometimes I will put them out in my freezer because I might not use all of them and it's going to be, in my house for a lot longer. If you do use a freezer to store your microgreen seeds, do let them come to room temperature before you start putting them on a seed tray to start growing them. That's going to help you grow them a little bit better. You also want to put them in an airtight container, and a watertight container is good too. You could use a Ziploc bag that won't necessarily be watertight. So if you have concerns about that because of like condensation in the refrigerator or freezer, like a Tupperware container or like a mason jar like it showed in this picture is really ideal. So those are some tips on how to, keep your seeds viable for as long as possible and where to store them. So I mentioned there's two different types of growing methods, and it's for you to decide. Sometimes I grow both, hydroponic and in trays. So if you grow in trays, you'll want to make sure that the tray is at least an inch in height and it has proper drainage holes. I love using recycled berry containers. When I did my talk out at the library a couple of weeks ago, I collected a bunch of old berry containers and I passed them out to folks. They're really great because they're the right height. They fit a lot of the sterile growing pads, and they have drainage holes already in it and a lid at top. So super, super great to use, and one less thing to buy, right? These seed trays come in different sizes. If you use them, I suggest making sure that they have holes. Not all of them come in holes. So if you buy flat trays like this, what I would suggest doing is poking holes in them to allow drainage and then doubling them up. And I'll talk about bottom watering. So this will really help when you bottom water the tray. You could let it soak in there and then dump the extra water and then allow any excess water to drain out, which you could then dump. So drainage holes is super important for the bottom watering, which we'll talk about, as well as to make sure it doesn't get too wet, which could prevent your seeds from growing. Hydroponic is the other option. So again, this is an option where it's a lot easier, quite honestly. And I find that it grows a little bit, hardier. Really, once you fill up the tray and with the water and sprinkle the seeds on it, you just let it grow because the water is filled up to the mesh screen. So the seeds are perfectly watered. You don't have to water it. And then as the roots grow down into the container, the plant's growing up. So the roots, as the water, level is going down, 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 the roots are reaching down to it. So let me zoom in there a little bit so you could see this. So this is the seed. You can see the seeds on the bottom and the microgreens that are growing. So these are full-size microgreens that I've started to harvest. And you could see that the roots have grown all the way down to reach the water. And it's really interesting, even when I peeked under the screen, even right after the seeds just germinated, the roots are already growing down there into the water. So it really is self-watering, which is really nice, super convenient. So selecting a growing tray is an option, and we'll talk a little bit about what kind of trays to grow. You want to make sure that it's flat and shallow. So you don't want something that's bumpy and ridgy because your seeds might all fall and pool to one side. That'll keep the seeds nice and stable on one same level. You want to make sure for sure there's drainage holes because you're going to be bottom watering them, and you want to make sure that any excess water drains out. You want to avoid portioned off containers. So see a container like this. These are really great if you're starting like something from seed that you're going to grow to a big plant. But when you're growing microgreens, you don't need something like that. In fact, you don't want it because you're going to be scattering a lot of trace in a small area that's almost going to be growing, closely, very densely populated. So it looks very lush like this. You're not growing one single plant at a time. You're growing many, many, many on one tray. So avoid portioned off containers. Hydroponic. If you're using hydroponic, it's going to be growing water below the screen. So you don't need to worry about any type of growing medium for the hydroponic. If you are growing in a tray, you will need to determine what kind of growing medium you're going to use. And I'll tell you about a couple different types. the ideal, what you do not want to use, soil from your garden. You want it to be sterile. So you don't, what does that mean? You don't want it to have any fertilizer or compost or anything that you would typically want to help a plant grow and flower and fruit. You want something that's just going to maintain equal, moisture, because that water, what the seed needs to grow is water. And then once it germinates, it needs the light, and then water throughout its life cycle. So really finding a sterile medium is ideal. Coconut coir, and I'll show you a picture on the next slide, is really ideal. It's really light and fluffy, and it looks like this. Here's a picture of coconut coir. It's really light and fluffy, so you'll smooth it out in your growing container. So it'll be it's nice and even, so your seeds won't fall all over the place. It'll just be right there on top, and it really, really helps maintain moisture. And so your once you water it, it'll not only stay longer, but it will, it'll maintain really a nice even moisture for a longer period of time. Again, you don't want, if you use a potting mix, you can try. I really would discourage using a potting mix. People have used, and I have read articles that say you could use potting mix, but make sure it's one without fertilizer or compost. It's really hard to know what's in potting mix. They will sometimes tell you what's contained. A lot of times it is going to have compost or some type of fertilizer or something that will act as a fertilizer. So for that, those type of things will give your microgreens a really off taste, which you don't want. You want it to have that strong, pungent, taste of a cilantro or basil or broccoli or whatever you're growing. So for that, I would kind of stay away from potting mix, or again, for sure, fertilizer or compost. You can also use sterile growing pads, and I will show you what those look like. They come in a lot of different sizes. So, if you're using a bigger tray or like the smaller berry container, you could find growing pads that fit those nice and snugly, or you could piece them together side by side. You could also use recycled, you could use paper towels. The one thing that I will say about paper towels is, yes, you can use them, but they're going to require a lot more maintenance because it's going to dry out. A lot of the growing mediums, like the growing pads that I'm going to share with you, they're used because they, like coconut coir, really retain water moisture really well. So you have to water maybe once a day. Paper towels, you're going to have to water more frequently. So definitely something you could use. It's just going to require a little bit more maintenance. So something to be aware of. So here's some examples of growing mediums. Coconut coir is one that I highly recommend. It will typically come in a block. I included this. This came with a bulb that I had purchased around the holidays. You might have purchased one and noticed this little, it looks like a big coin, and it says add water, and then it puffs up, and it's this fluffy mixture that kind of looks like the color of soil. That's coconut coir. So you might have seen it and not even realized what it is. This block right here is about 1 pound, and it's about 8 inches big by a couple inches high. If that's how coconut coir is sold, so you could throw it in a cabinet to store it. When you're ready to use it, I just put it in a 5-gallon bucket, and I fill it with warm water. I cover it, and then it will puff out, and it makes about 5 pounds of coconut coir. So then I'll just cover with a towel and have it there, in my garage when I need it. So coconut coir is a great alternative. If you want just some type of product like a growing pad that you can store in a drawer and just use when you need it, there's a lot of different options. Recycled wood are really great options. This particular size of recycled wood is what I use for the berry containers. It literally fits it perfectly. And then jute is also another growing medium. Hemp is another growing medium. These are all, really, they're made of recycled material, and they really are known to be able to keep moisture, for a longer period of time, which is why they're selected. Read the labels. You just want to make sure that you select a growing medium that does not contain plastics. So water is certainly very important. We'll talk about that when we talk about how to grow microgreens. I just recently added this slide because as you start to read books, articles, other things about growing microgreens, especially if you're going to be growing hydroponic, you might see something in an article or book that, or a video that you're watching that says, microgreens prefer water that's slightly acidic. So what does that mean? So on the pH scale, it goes from anywhere from 0 to 14. Pure water is considered to have a pH of 7. The more acidic it is, it's going to be 0 to 6, so it will be below 7, below that pure water. If it's more alkaline, it will be 8 to 14. When you grow hydroponic, it is true that it does grow a little bit better if it's slightly acidic. And when I say slightly acidic, it's a 6. So a pH of a 6 is ideal if you're growing hydroponic. But let me tell you, I grow hydroponic almost all the time, and I've never used or checked the pH of my water. Here in Contra Costa County, our pH is about 8.5, so slightly more alkaline. That's just a little bit above, that pH of a 6 that's ideal for microgreens. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. I just wanted to mention that, so if you read it, you'll know about it, and you'll know my water that I have here from the tap is perfectly fine. If you are noticing some trouble growing and you've got good seeds and you're doing the water, you could try adding a little bit of lemon. So adding a little bit of acid, vinegar, that's going to bring the alkaline down and make it more acidic. So if you're using tap water, you could add a little bit of lemon or vinegar. If you have more acidic water, you could add a little bit of baking soda to push it up and make it a little more alkaline. But the main thing really to remember when it comes to water is just maintaining consistent moisture and knowing that our Contra Costa water straight from the tap is going to be a-okay. So now's the fun part. I'm going to walk you step by step how to start growing microgreens from a tray and then from hydroponic. Then I'm going to play a video where you could watch me doing all these steps. So I'm a more visual learner, so I know the video is added for people like me who like to see it. But I'll walk through step by step, so you'll get to hear me talk about it twice. And again, this will be up on our YouTube, and I actually have this video in a shorter version already on YouTube, so you could play this back at any time. So one of the first things you're going to want to do or think about doing is soaking seeds overnight. This is 100% optional, especially for smaller seeds like herbs or lettuces, broccoli that are smaller seeds. You really don't want to soak it because they're so small. They're going to just get all stuck together. If you do soak like larger seeds, it will help on average, speed up your growing time by about a day. So if you're in a little bit of rush and you're growing seeds that are a little bit larger, soaking might be an option for you. You're then going to want to fill your tray with your growing medium and moisten. So here is a picture of two different trays. Both of them I'm using berry containers as an option. This first picture is using coconut coir. With my coconut coir with these berry trays, there are a lot of drainage holes, so I put a paper towel on the bottom so the coconut coir doesn't spill out. And then over here, I used a recycled wood growing medium. So you're going to want to fill your tray with your growing mediums. That's the first step. Then you're going to want to scatter your seeds. So for a container the size of these berry containers, you're going to use about 1 teaspoon. So you'll scatter them easily. And you could take your spoon and kind of tap, 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 so it slowly gets on, and just make sure it's pretty even. And let me do a little zoom up for you. So see, you could see in this, when I zoom up, you'll see seeds are pretty much scattered everywhere. When I did this at our community garden, one of our community gardens up in Concord that our program supports, this participant was asking me, did I sprinkle enough seeds? And so I told her, you know what, it looks like you're missing some space around the edge. So I had her grow back and fill in those kind of blank and empty spaces. So the key is just kind of evenly distribute those seeds. And then you're going to want to mist with water. So what you're going to want to do, let me back up a little bit. The growing medium, you do want to moisten it. Sorry, I didn't say that. So if you have the coconut coir, I highly recommend you get the right moisture level of that coconut coir in that bucket. You want it to be light and fluffy and like kind of like the wetness of a wrung out sponge. If it's too wet, you're going to drown your seeds. So you want it that light and fluffy. So get it to the right moisture before you put it in the tray. If you're using a grow tray, you'll place this growing medium in the tray, and then I get a plate, fill the plate with water, and just let it moisten on the plate so that grow pad's nice and moist. Okay, then you scatter your seeds, and then you mist it. So you're misting it on the top. That's going to get both the bottom will be touching water, touching the growing medium, and then you're getting water on the top to mist it. So until, the seeds germinate, you want to make sure both the growing medium is wet, and then you mist on top to keep it wet on the top as well. And I usually do that about once a day. Because if you think about when you grow seeds, usually they're underground, so they don't dry out as fast because they're not exposed to as much air. With microgreens, you're growing it on the top of a surface, so they will be drying out a little bit more quickly. So you just want to make sure until they're germinated that medium is nice and moist and that you spray the top. Then you'll cover and germinate until they germinate. So for these type of containers that have a lid, you'll just slowly shut the lid. If you do it too fast, I've noticed seeds kind of bounce. If you don't have a container, that's okay, like that with a lid. For my hydroponic, I just take a piece of foil and I put it over the top of the container, and I poke holes for air circulation. So that you can see here that it's starting to germinate. And you really want to make sure, take a look, look at your seeds, like, are they all germinated? If they're not all germinated, cover and wait another day or two. Once they're all germinated, you can remove the cover and start to green it up. So what you do is, you can see from this picture, the seeds are germinated. I took the cover off, and then I'm going to move it into a window where it could get 10 or more light hours, or have a grow light over it. So it's very interesting. Do you see how these microgreens are kind of yellow, the top of the seeds? Don't be surprised, you will, because you're depriving the plant of light. So, once you expose the plant to light, then, it'll start to get the chlorophyll, and it will get green up, is what we call it. So once it has that interaction with light and photosynthesis starts, then the chlorophyll can be produced, and you'll start to see your plant turning green, which is pretty cool. It happens within a day or so. And then maintain consistent moisture. So I like to bottom water. So what that means is, if I take this tray, I'll put a plate down, fill it with water, and I just let it soak until the tray is filled with water, till the medium is fully moist. So you usually will want to do that daily. You don't need to mist anymore once you take the top off. Misting it could cause mold or other things, and it's not going to really get to the bottom. You really want to keep the seeds and the roots wet. So misting's fine while you're waiting for the seeds to germinate, but after that, just water from the bottom, and that'll keep the seeds and the plant from growing. So how do we do hydroponic? First, we need to get some water. A pH of 6 is ideal, but again, like I said, Contra Costa water here from the tap is perfectly fine as well. Add a cap full of hydrogen peroxide, and then so that water and the hydrogen peroxide would go into your base that holds all the water. You do not need to pre-soak seeds with hydroponic. They're going to have constant contact with water. So when I touch that screen that my seeds are growing on, before I sprinkle seeds, my fingers become wet. So the seeds will become wet as well. So no need to pre-soak. They'll have nice contact with water. Then you're going to block the light for a couple days till they germinate. So you don't have to see this in this picture, but I always poke holes in there to let air circulation. Then you're going to block the light until it germinates. This tray right now started to germinate, but if you could see there's a lot of seeds that haven't germinated. So this is a good picture to show you. I would say give it another day or two. And when it starts to look like this picture, and let me zoom in so you could see those closer. So you can see here, there's still quite a few seeds that haven't germinated. And then if you compare that to over here, they've all germinated. I would wait till it looks like something like this, where majority of the seeds have germinated, to take the lid off and then bring it to the window. And do you see how it's yellow? Within it, that's totally normal again, because you've deprived it of light. Within a day, it'll green up. Then you just put it in front of your grow light or your window for 10 or more hours and continue growing. What I like to do with all of these type of trays is every day I just turn it so that the stems grow nice and straight. Because you'll see at the end of the day, it's kind of leaning a little towards the window. And so I just keep rotating every day to keep them growing nice and straight and strong. So now I'm going to give you a short video where I'll take a sip of water and I'll let you guys watch this video. Let me take my my laser pointer off. And I'm going to play this video for you. That'll walk you through what I just talked about.
Hi, I'm going to show you how to get started microgreens using one of two methods, using a sterile growing medium and then using a hydroponic self-watering tray. So let's start with the sterile medium first. I picked a 100% recyclable wood medium and I have a recycled raspberry container. You want something that's flat and shallow. And then what you'll do is you'll put your growing medium down at the bottom. Push it because you want as flat of a surface as possible. Next, I need to wet the growing medium. I'm going to pour some water on a plate and I'm going to place the container that has holes on the bottom for drainage in here to get the growing medium all wet. What I like to do is count in my head, and I'll do it out loud for you, how long it takes for the growing medium to be fully wet. That way, when you go to rewater it each time, you'll know how long it takes for everything to get evenly moist. So let's water it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 seconds is what it takes. So now what I'm going to do again is just push the medium in place. It will be a little bit wet, so you might want to grab a towel or something for it to go on until it kind of dries up a little bit. Next, I'll take my microgreen seeds. You need about 1 teaspoon. And I'm just, if you could give a little close up, I'm going to evenly distribute them on the grow pad. With a container this size, you need even a little bit less. You do want to make sure you leave room for air circulation. Then I'll take my sprayer, moisten the top, and I'll carefully shut it. I like to do it softly so the seeds don't bounce around. Now I will put this in a dark space for a couple days to germinate. How do I start a hydroponic? First, I take out the mesh screen that comes on top. Then I'll fill the water to the water line. Next, I put the mesh screen back on top. And you'll know you have enough water if you touch the mesh screen and your hands are wet. That's how the seeds are going to stay wet. So let's get a teaspoon of seeds. This is a salad blend. And I'm going to do the same thing. I just carefully, evenly put them all around the screen. Then I do the same thing. I spray it. Then I'll cover it with a tinted aluminum foil with holes in it and put it in a place not exposed to direct sunlight for 3 to 4 days until it germinates. Thank you.
All right, so that is how you do it. And you see this hydrogen peroxide right here in my video? You'll notice I forgot in the video to add it, but easy enough. There's a little holes on the side of the hydroponic growing. You could just give a little squirt in there. That's what I did after I did this video. And if you forget, it's fine. I've forgotten before and it grew just fine. But I want to tell you a funny story about these microgreens. So I was growing these and I was kind of cleaning up and I put them in a drawer, which is nice and dark. So they're out of the way because I had a bunch of these trays I had started kind of clean up when I had somebody coming over. Then I went away for 3 days and forgot to take them out before I left. When I came back, they were really tall. They were about an inch tall. So several days passed when I should have taken them out to put them in front of the window. And they're really yellow. And I thought, should I dump them? I'm like, nah, let's see what happens. I put them out in front. They kept growing. Within a couple of days, they turned green. The kohlrabi stems turned purple, and here they are. You'll see I took them and then kind of plopped them over an egg that I had for breakfast. So, don't worry, microgreens are pretty resilient. Even when you do little things like that, don't feel like you have to start all over, throw over, carry it through the end, and I bet you'll get something pretty worthwhile and something you can enjoy eating. So once you've started your microgreens and they are, you've germinated them, you've moved them to the window, what are some tips for growing them? You've heard me say a lot about the light. Bright light, 10 hours is ideal. A south-facing window is going to get you the most light during the day, so that's ideal. But a western-facing window, some space that's going to get that amount of light. And again, if you're doing a grow light, you'll want to do it for 10 hours. You do not need to keep your grow lights on. In fact, you do not want to keep your grow lights on 24 hours a day. 10 hours is enough. All plants need some level of light and dark during a day, while they grow. So getting that dark period for your plant, even if you're using a grow light, is important. If you do the lights too long, it's going to grow a lot faster, and you're probably going to have a little bit less nutritional value and flavor. So 10 hours is enough. Water is super important. So you always want to make sure you have equal, consistent moisture. So that's going to be very critical. Low humidity is also important. So you don't want it super hot and stuffy. And have good air circulation. I have just my regular house. I have it on the countertop. So it's, fully exposed, and, I keep my house at normal temperatures. If you're worried about air circulation, you think it's too humid or, something, you could add a fan near your plant. That will add good circulation. It'll actually, adding a little bit of air circulation to plant is what can make them stronger as they grow taller. But not necessary. I've never used a fan. Other growing tips: avoid heat pads. For most seeds to germinate, they need a temperature of 65 to 75 degrees. Most of us keep our house to about that during the daytime, and then dipping at night is fine. Heat pads could be used during when you're first starting seeds to germinating them, but I really would not recommend that for a couple reasons for microgreens. Usually when you're using heat pads, you're starting seeds and it's in more soil, and it might get the seeds a little bit too hot. And if you forget to turn them off, it could affect what your microgreens look like. It's just really not necessary. So I wouldn't use it. You do not want to fertilize. So again, you want to use some type of sterile growing medium that doesn't have fertilizers or other things in it. That's going to give it like a really off taste. And that includes, you don't want something with compost either. There's no need to thin. If you read seed packets, it might say, like you say, if you've grown carrots, once they germinate, you want to thin to, 1 to 2 inches between each plant. That's not necessary with microgreens, because what you're doing is like this beautiful picture. You want really densely grown microgreens. So no thinning is necessary. Just let them grow and it's going to look like a nice lush carpet. You can grow different varieties together. So you remember in the beginning, I mentioned slow growing and quick growing microgreens. If you decide to grow, say 2 different types of plants together on one tray, just make sure that they fully develop at the same time. So you don't want to put a fast growing and a slow growing seed on the same tray, because then it's going to be inconsistent. You'll have some that will be really short and some that will be tall. So you want to grow things that are going to mature at the same amount of time, at the same pace. A lot of times if you buy, like I buy a salad blend, the seed companies that put those together will be taking that into consideration. So they're packaging those blends with things that grow, at the same maturity rate. But if you're doing it on your own, that's just something to be, aware of. So now you've grown them and you're ready to do the good part, to harvest them and eat them. So the timing of when you harvest depends on the plant variety. Again, like I mentioned, slow growing, quick growing. So it's going to be anywhere from, on average about 2 weeks. It's going to take some a little bit longer. You'll know it's ready when you obviously have your cotyledons, you're going to have the greens at the top, and they're going to be about 1 to 3 inches in height. So that's the right length that you're going to want to grow your microgreens to. Once they are at that level, they're ready to be clipped. Again, use scissors, make sure they're sterilized or clean. I just run mine through, the dishwasher to make sure they're nice and clean. And I just grab the handful that I want and then trim it all the way at the bottom. So you could see where I cut right here. This is a tray of broccoli that I grew. So you just cut what you want with scissors. That's pretty simple. How do you store it? So I like to just store mine on the countertop. I keep watering it and I just clip as I go, because I like to put them on my salads or on my eggs in the morning, especially for a little extra greens in the morning. You could also store it in your refrigerator. So once it reaches that 1 to 3 inches in height, you could put it in your refrigerator for about 1 week. What you don't want to do is wash your microgreens. They're going to rot really easily. So if you, cut them off, wrap them in a paper towel in an airtight container, store them that way, or I just put the container itself in the refrigerator. What do you do when you're done with it? I just take the growing medium and I put it in the green waste bin. If you have a compost, a worm bin, you could certainly put it in that. For using it as compost or green waste. And with the hydroponic, you literally can just pull off the roots. And I also put that in the green waste or in my worm bin as well. And then you want to sanitize the containers. So if you're going to be reusing the containers, you want to sanitize them. The hydroponic, I just put that in the dishwasher and it comes out perfectly sanitized. For like the plastic containers, you could use a little bit of pine sol and water, or a water and bleach mixture, 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. And just really then I would, if you're going to be, then I would then, since you're, going to be touching food on there, I would really rinse it and wash it with soap very, very well. That's how you'll sanitize it. So last up is some common growing issues, and then how to enjoy, and then lots of questions. So one question you might have is you open up that container and to check to see if your seeds are germinating, and you see this. You think, my goodness, this is what I thought when I first grew microgreens. What is this? Is this mold on my seeds? And the answer is nope, it's not mold. What it is, these are actually root hairs. So we don't usually get to see those because when we're starting plants from seeds, the roots are growing below the surface, but we're growing microgreens on top of the surface. So when they first start germinating, you are going to see these root hairs. So when you're taking the top off, you will see these. So what I usually do is I just spray them, and you'll for sure know that they're root hairs. If you spray them, they kind of go away. If you still see that fuzzy stuff after you sprayed it, you might have mold and you want to throw that away and then start again. But this is very typical that you'll see. So just spray it with water. It'll go away if they're the root hairs. So what happens if you have droopy microgreens? It's probably most likely either you're giving it too much sun or you need to increase the moisture. So again, just make sure your container, your growing medium always is nice and moist. That's going to help prevent droopy microgreens. What about if it's really, really leggy? A lot of times you see leggy plants because they're kind of trying to reach towards the sun or trying to find light. If you've ever grown a plant like on a patio, it's usually going to be kind of reaching and a little bit leggy trying to find the light. You just want to increase the light. So maybe move it to a different spot, add a grow light, or find a spot that has a longer light hours, again, 10 plus hours. What about if your seeds just aren't germinating? They're kind of not even getting to this point where you start to see the cotyledons. There's a couple things that could be the reason. Again, going back to water, you've heard me say it, your growing medium maybe is not moist enough, so work on the moisture. You might have it too hot or too cold. Remember, about 70 degrees is ideal, 65 to 75. Maybe your seeds weren't a very good quality. That could definitely impact it. Maybe they weren't stored properly, or they're really old and have a really low germination rate. So those are all things to think about if you're not finding that your seeds are germinating. So how do you enjoy? There's so many different ways. I showed you the picture of the microgreens on top of my eggs in the morning. I love it that way. I've been to restaurants where there's like a little corn salad at a Mexican food restaurant. And they put cilantro greens on top. They're great in tacos, on top of salads, great on top of fish or meats. Pastas, I mean, it's great to put like a little basil microgreens on top of pasta to get some more of that basil flavor with your spaghetti sauce, in spring rolls or as a garnish. I also love sprinkling them on top of like cheeses that I have on a dessert platter. Some of them are beautiful colors. They could be purple or bright pink. So it adds really pretty element to your food. And it's something fun to talk about. At least for me, it is. So we're just going to go through really quick what we've talked about and then open it up for questions. And this is a nice picture of the Adaptive Learning Center of a class that I taught there on growing microgreens. So first thing you want to think about is, what do you want to grow it in, tray or hydroponic? Then you want to gather up all your supplies. Again, that's probably going to take the longest, including purchasing your seeds. You can soak the seeds if they're larger in size. If you're growing hydroponic, you don't need to. You want to place your seeds on that growing medium. Make sure that it's moist, or put it on a mesh screen if you're growing hydroponically. Find a bright window that has 10 plus hours of sunlight. Make sure you maintain consistent moisture for your growing medium on your tray, and harvest once your microgreens are about 1 to 3 inches and they have the cotyledon, so not when the first true leaves are there. And then garnish it. Use as a garnish or enjoy however you would like. And that, all my friends who've joined tonight, is growing microgreens.